So thank you very much for waiting. I just, when I was talking to Danica about peace education, it just got me thinking about the stories of the children and how powerful they are when we allow them to live on the landscape. So I thought maybe I would just share a couple of experiences around that and the really important value that that brings to children. So often we think of peace education from a teacher perspective, from the ways we can bring peace education into our school and you know, how we can elevate it in the community. I'm going to share a link with you. I don't know if you've been I'll do it at the end because I'll have to find it, but I don't know if you're aware of this, but there's a campaign on Twitter right now for I Declare World Peace, where you make a little video and it's just you make the video and you put it onto this YouTube channel that is all about just individuals declaring world peace. And so, you know, most of the things that, or many of, not all of them, but many of the things that we do around peace education tend to be quite adult-centric. And I think that's because for children, you know, life is pretty simple. You get along or you don't get along, and the whole point of elevating peace beyond relationships on the playground or with your friends becomes a completely different sort of experience. But I wanted to just speak to the power of peace education in a school for children. And I've had the very great pleasure over the years of working with a number of children, of refugee children, of children who've come in from other countries to live in Canada. And you know, I think this has really come to the forefront for me in this past year of, you know, not just the pandemic, but so much unrest and talk about racism and the way we approach accepting others and the language that we use. I just signed up for a course on using language and how we use language and how that has changed and continues to evolve and change. I keep saying I want to get old enough that I don't have to learn anything new, but feels like everything old turns brand new again from time to time. So I wanted to just tell a couple of stories. And the first story that I want to tell about took place a number of years ago at Douglas Harkness School, and that was my very first school that I brought peace education to. I started as principal there in 2004, and I had happened to take a course on peace education at the University of Alberta that summer. And so when I came in and they said, oh, you get to be principal now, even though I hadn't applied, I thought, well, okay, if I have to be principal, then I'm going to try something that I want to try and see how it goes. And so we really started to look at what is peace education and how can we build sort of that environment in our school. At the time, Teresa Bowles, who also teaches with me now at Cranston, she did teach at Cranston with me, but at Eric Harvey, just came in as a teacher with me there. And I think it was about her, but it would have been around 2006, 2007. Some of you may remember this story, Hannah's Suitcase, and it was at the Glenbow Museum, and it was traveling around the country, and it was a very popular little sort of grade 5, 6 level novel. We were really talking about, we had 37 different countries represented in our grade 5, 6 classroom of about 75 children. And so we were really trying to look at different perspectives, look at the historical perspective of government, of course, and so on. So we had looked at the breadwinner that year. And so we thought we would bring Hannah's Suitcase to the children and start to talk about, you know, memories and the experience of the Holocaust and so on. As we started to read the book, and we didn't get very far into it, we had a lovely young man who was actually the second year with us. He was in grade 6, he'd been with us in grade 5, just a really keen little guy. We knew he was from the Middle East somewhere, but because of his name, but we weren't quite sure where. And we're in the middle of reading aloud one day, and all of a sudden he just burst into tears and said, "But I hate the Jews." And we stopped all conversation, and he was so upset. We took him out of the classroom, and we said to the children, you know, sometimes when we read materials, it evokes a feeling in us, and we need to deal with that. And we will talk to the child, and we will try to make some sense of that for him and for you, because we really had a feeling that, you know, all children should understand when somebody was sad or upset. So Teresa took the little guy outside and had a conversation with him. I had a conversation with him later. It turned out that he was actually Palestinian. his father was teaching at the university, and he said, but all my life I've been brought up to believe that Jewish people are bad and Jewish children are awful, and now you're telling me that they're not, and I don't know what to do with that. And so we spent quite a lot of time in that classroom over the next couple of, well, actually, in the end, it took a couple of months and longer, just talking about when we hear stories, many of our children had come from war-torn areas, from Croatia, from the Middle East, and from Afghanistan. So very few of our children were unfamiliar with the concept of war, except for the Canadian kids that were sort of sprinkled in and out and about. And but I think it really helped us understand that perspective colors everything, and that you can't just say that we're a peaceful place. You have to teach about where peace comes from. And where peace comes from is acceptance of each other for who we are and the histories that we bring, and the belief systems that we bring along as well. It took us quite a while to make sense of that. He actually only left the room for that one session. He came back, and we asked him if he would like to tell his story to the children, and he did say that he would like to. And so he got to speak his story from the heart around that experience of, growing up in Palestine, and then understanding who the Jews from a Palestinian perspective. So it really gave us an opportunity to think about, what does peace education mean for the children, not just for the adults in the building. And I think what it really helped me think about as a peace educator was how not to trivialize peace education. So peace education didn't become for me, a series of lessons that we would teach, or particular practices that we would do. It became very responsive to the needs of the kids, because I realized, well, that was only my second or third year with bringing peace education into the school. And when you have that strong a reaction from one of your children, you start to realize that we think peace education means one thing, coming from our privileged perspective of not having lived through a refugee or a war experience, and it means quite something else if you're the child that's come through that from the other side. That young man stayed in touch with Mrs. Bowles for a couple of years, because his dad moved, I think they went to Saudi Arabia from here, but he would travel to universities for 2 years on contracts and teach, and then move on to another country. So he's a well-traveled young man, and very, very smart. And I fully expect to see him, become prime minister or something of somewhere someday, as he grows older. He talked a lot about, as we went through the rest of grade 6 and when he went into grade 7, he talked a lot about how important that event was in his life, that's where he began to understand that even though you had an opinion about something, it could be changed. And I think that's another powerful lesson of peace education, because when we listen to other stories with an open heart and an open mind, we can really be able to receive their stories in a generous and a kind way. And then from there, we can start to make sense of it ourselves. So I don't think that peace education means, yes, it's not a kumbaya moment where we all just sit around and say, yes, we all love and appreciate each other. We have to build that with an understanding of who that other person is and what those feelings are and where they come from. We're in the middle of a bit of a similar situation like that. This year, we have a young man in our school who's come through a refugee situation from Yemen, and a little guy who's gone through lots of trauma pretty recently, and from a fairly well-to-do family in Yemen, that when the civil war began, really upset his family, and he had to leave his family had to leave the country. So we had a day at school, dressed like a teacher day, a spirit day, something to do during the pandemic that would get the kids thinking about something besides, I'm stuck in this space all by myself. He dressed like a teacher. Actually, he dressed like a teacher that we don't have any of in our school, with a shirt and tie and nice suit and all dressed up. And most of our teachers, we do have 4 male teachers, but they don't dress like that every day. But he came dressed like a teacher from his country. And then he asked his classroom teacher if he could speak to the class first thing in the morning, that he had some things he wanted to share. And so she gave him that opportunity. And what he talked about was what it had been like for him to leave his country and be put into a refugee situation, and where they went and all the experiences that he could remember. And that had happened to him when he was 4, and he's now 8. So half of his life ago, but still pretty relevant, and he's very aware of it, since he still has relatives in Yemen, and he still has relatives that are in Saudi Arabia and in other places where they've had to leave their country. I'd love to tell you that there's a happy ending to every story. There's not a happy ending to every story, and we are working through the multiple pieces of this one, because one of the things that happens with children when their lives are in upheaval at young ages is they do really struggle with building some of those strong relationships, and trusting and moving into friendship spaces that are positive. And so we're really working with him to try and deal with some of those traumas, and to not react instantly to a situation that doesn't appear to be going his way. And so I think that's the other lesson that I've really learned over the years, is that just because someone's been through a terrible experience doesn't automatically mean that they are going to automatically see someone else's perspective, because we all wear the lens of our own experiences, and that's what we see the world through. So I wanted to just speak to that a little bit tonight. I think as we move through the pandemic, and our children go through multiple experiences, and not all of them are refugee experiences, but sometimes I think children do feel a little bit like a refugee when they have been confined to the same home with the same family, with very many rules around them and very many restrictions. There's that whole sense of, I've lost my center of gravity, that world that I can count on, and that peace that I can go forward into confidently, knowing what I can do and what the world expects of me. And I feel like if we can learn any lessons from our kids who come into schools from really different kinds of experiences, like the refugee experience, it would be that we need to develop that growth mindset with children. And that is a huge piece of peace education for me, just helping children understand, not that the world is always going to be Pollyanna-ish and rosy, because I might like to think that, but I know that that's not necessarily true. I don't think that a growth mindset is that we will always look to the positive. I think that a growth mindset means we'll make room for considering other opinions and other ways of looking at things, and we'll understand what perspective really is. I've also learned, because of peace education, that that is not a simple process, that you can't just simply, hang a sign on the wall and say, today we're going to have a growth mindset, and therefore everybody will. We have to learn, we have to scaffold that learning, just like we do all learning, and help our children get to a place where they understand how to accept and acknowledge the differences in others. Sometimes I am so moved by the kindness and the acceptance that children have for each other. And I think part of that is we give them room on the landscapes of school to be accepting of each other. We teach them how to do that. We ask them to have empathy for us. We say things to them like, how would you feel if that were you? Can you imagine? We get people to share their stories. And in those ways, we start to scaffold the ways to understand each other. And I think if we could do that with some adults, that might, really advance the cause of peace education in the world as well. The third story that I'm going to share with you is also a story from our school this year. And we have a young man in our school, and Allison will know him well, who has been with us for, I think this is his 4th year with us. And this is a child who has lots of developmental challenges, has come a million miles, but still can act out in ways that are very frightening to other children. The children have had to learn to adjust and adapt, and I think the one thing that we sometimes overlook is how accepting they have learned to become of him. So despite the fact that he will throw things and slam doors and scream and yell and make loud noises and frighten them to death sometimes, especially in confined pandemic bordered spaces, we recently had a strategist come from out of the school who hadn't been in our school before, and he got to witness firsthand the acceptance of the children of this child, saying, welcoming him back to the classroom, asking him when he's going to come back in, how is he, they don't harbor those. It's not like, well, you acted like that, so now I'm going to be afraid of you. They understand that that's an expression of something inside, and that there's more to this child. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens by design. And so I think the probably one of the greatest strengths of peace education in schools is that we get to design the ways that we introduce it to children, and we scaffold it for them. We give them an opportunity to try a little bit on. So just, give it a go. Try and make a friend with someone. Here's a strategy. Here's something that you can use. If that didn't work, then we try something else, and we can shepherd them and guide them, and yet let them take those small risks so that one day they can take the bigger risk. When you have a child who is extremely notably different, and the children still accept that person and welcome them in, then you know that you've made some gains in this is a world where everybody can be welcome and accepted for who they are. I think that the greatest strengths for peace education is the development of empathy. And often when we see children who are really struggling with friendships or with making gains socially, I have a favorite line at my school when I'm first dealing with kids. I always say, oh, I think that child might have a social communication disorder, which I don't really know what that is, but I think it sounds like all the things when you put them together where they can't communicate in a social space. So I just use it as a catchphrase. And then I finally met someone who described it all to me, and I thought, oh, I should stop saying that. But I think our children come into schools, and we assume lots of things about them. We assume that they've come with breakfast, and they're clean, and they understand the alphabet, and they know how to make a friend. And we find out very quickly that they come in from all over. One of the most important things we can do is help them to develop that empathy for others. And so when children are really struggling, I would say probably 90% of the time, and I'm not exaggerating, there will be an issue with empathy with that child. They haven't learned that capacity to look beyond themselves. And not only that, sometimes they can't, because they may have some things going on for them that they just aren't able to get past yet. So for example, if you have a child who's recently lost a parent or someone close to them, or has been through a really traumatic situation like losing a home, sometimes they're just not in a space where empathy can be surfaced just yet. It can come later, but at this particular moment in their lives, it can't. And so we have been affiliated with the Roots of Empathy program at all of my schools. This will be my 16th year that I have been connected with Roots of Empathy. Mary Gordon brought the program to Alberta 16 years ago. I don't even know how I happened to end up in the meeting where she was. I just went to a meeting by accident, and she was there talking about the program. My daughter had just had a baby and was going through postpartum. I think my granddaughter was like 3 or 4 months old, and I thought, this is what you need. You need to get out. You need to, this is me. You need to. And so I called her up and said, I have a program I want you to go to. And fortunately, she said, well, okay. And we started at Douglas Harkness, we started one of the very first Roots of Empathy programs in the city of Calgary. And we have had multiple programs running in the school every year since then. If you're not familiar with the Roots of Empathy program, I really encourage you to have a look into it. It is the program that pairs babies and infants with classrooms. And so at our school, we have Roots of Empathy babies that are baby teachers in all of our grade 1-2 classrooms. The program is well designed. It was originally intended to, Mary Gordon is from Newfoundland originally, and she was a social worker, and her intent was to bring single moms, young single moms that were in high school, in contact with other children in school, other high school students, so that they would understand what it was like to raise a baby. And then that grew into, could we build some awareness in children of how important that parent-child relationship is, so that we have empathy for others? Because the one thing that that humans can't do is we can't survive if we don't have other humans to look after us from birth. So she's got a really well-developed program, and you can have a Roots of Empathy baby teacher in your class right up to grade 12 and university if you want to. I think there's even some seniors homes that have it in some of the provinces, although I'm not sure about it in Alberta. So for us, we start in grade 1, where we bring in a baby, and so the baby visits once a month. and the Roots of Empathy coordinator comes in once a week. And so once a week she comes in and she talks about whatever is on the curriculum with the children. So it could be growth and development, it could be nutrition, it could be sleep, it could be bonding, it could be crying, it could be having empathy and sympathy when somebody hurts themselves. It could be about play, but all of those lessons coincide or correlate to the health curriculum in terms of how we as humans develop emotionally, physically, and developmentally through the first year of our lives. The baby comes in once a month, we weigh it, we measure it, it has a big green blanket that it sits on, the children sit around it, and the baby does whatever it wants because the baby is the star of the show. And as the baby's on the blanket playing with the children, the coordinator and the teacher and the mother, or the father, mother and the father, are there to answer questions about what's going on as it comes up for the children. We do it 2 years in a row. So in grade 1, we find that the children tend to really be absorbed with the baby and all of the things that are going on with the baby. And they're not paying a whole lot of attention to the bigger issues like nutrition and sleep and so on. But by grade 2, they've had that experience for the year before. By grade 2, they now have really tuned into how do I take care of this baby? What kind of a relationship can I build with this baby? And it is one of the things I have been astonished with the program over 16 years is how often those little babies come in and develop a comfort with children almost immediately. So they can be crying when they come into the school, and the minute they get into the classroom and on the green blanket, they're looking around and smiling because it's like they see their friends. And that whole piece of how human interaction, how humans connect with each other and have an immediate bond starts to build that empathy for, we didn't know this baby before it got here, but now it's our friend. And I think that is a huge piece of what peace education is about, is that building of empathy. Roots of Empathy does it from the earliest ages. And one of the things I have loved most about having Roots of Empathy babies in the school is that whoever has a baby, and I have gone recruiting for me, I have stopped people in grocery stores to say, when is your baby due? I have made a mistake once. I'm much more careful now. In the early days, I once asked, and she said, I'm not pregnant. And I thought, anyway, I have recruited babies on buses and in parks, and fortunately, I'm in a school right now where all the moms are very willingly, keeping the population of the school going. And one of the things I loved about being at Douglas Harkness when we first started the Roots of Empathy program there was the wide variety of cultural backgrounds that our babies came from. So children got to see babies from all over the world come in and be in our classrooms and bring that awareness of culture from the very beginning. And I can remember one of my first babies, probably year 2 at Douglas Harkness with the program, that came in. The mom was from Asia, and she whistled to her baby to get it to pay attention to her. She had different whistles for I'm coming, or your food's coming. I had run into that once before when I was in the hospital having my youngest daughter, and I was just fascinated by that. Well, first of all, I can't whistle, so I think I would have been a failure at that, but I was just fascinated. But it had never occurred to me, how do mothers communicate with babies around the world? And this mama that was in the bed next to me communicated with her baby by whistling. And I thought, what a beautiful way to connect with a baby. I could not whistle, but what a beautiful way to let the baby know you're coming when you're in the kitchen or whatever. And you just want to say, you can stop crying, I'm on my way. And so we had a mama who came into Douglas Harkness, and she whistled with her baby as a form of communication. We had a baby come in that was deaf, and the mom used sign language with the baby. And so the children got to see the mom and the baby interact in a completely different way as well. Those are I believe it's these experiences that we bring to our children that really enrich the whole idea of peace education. I want to say to you that I have never planned any of those interactions that I have just told you about. So I did not plan to read Hannah's suitcase and to have a child be upset because he'd never experienced the Jews in a positive way before. I did not plan for the child from Yemen to stand up and say, I'm from Yemen, and these are the experiences I've had. I did not plan for the child who has been having the outburst, and the children are still saying, when are you coming back into the classroom? How are you today? Are things going well for you? I did not plan to have a Roots event. I planned for Roots of Empathy, but I didn't plan for babies to come in where moms communicated in different ways than what I would typically expect. It's in the not planning that the richest moments of growth and understanding occur for children. And I think it's when we open our schools to the possibility of having peace education discussions and peace education opportunities, and we build those scaffolds in place for building empathy, for building understanding, for building room to grow and open mindsets. I feel like those are the places where children come to school and get the rich experiences that should be in schools. And I'm going to end my little conversation here and try not to turn it into a rant by just speaking to what's missing in the new curriculum draft that has been written for Alberta. And I think what's really missing in the curriculum draft is the awareness of children. Because if we do not have opportunities built into our curriculum where children can offer their opinions, share their experiences, scaffold ways to build empathy and growth mindsets, and feel like they have efficacy in shaping the community and the environment, and they have the warmth and the space to share their stories, then we have failed them. And I have now written 14 responses to the program of studies, because you can write for each grade level and each subject level, and I am determined I am going to complete them all before I turn gray. Well, I probably am already gray because I color my hair, but anyway, before I let it turn gray. I think every time I go through, and I'm going through them very carefully, there are so many gaps in the actual content. So you're going to teach a concept here that you haven't taught the precursors to. So that's a problem. Because one thing I have learned is children don't come with a set of knowledge that I will build on from here. We have to help them scaffold in academic ways as well. But the really big missing component of the program of studies across the board is the absence of children, awareness of children, of how they interact with learning things, how they use their curiosity and their inventiveness and their innovation to try stuff out. One of the most beautiful moments that you see when the Roots of Empathy is taking place is when a little one will try and talk to a baby that's never talked to a baby before, because they don't really know what to do. And so we have talked about things like making eye contact and let the baby see you smile, and how your body language speaks to you. And so when you see a little one who's kind of hung back for 2 or 3 months, and they've all got a chance if they want to speak to the baby, and a little one in grade 1 or grade 2 that just really hasn't felt comfortable and all of a sudden says, can I say something to the baby? And they will sit up on their knees and they will look right at the baby. And I want you to know, you don't have to, as the mama, turn the baby to see that child. The baby knows which person's going to be looking at them and making eye contact, because that is one of the first forms of communication for infants. And that little baby will turn and look at that child, and they'll start talking. You don't have to teach the child how to talk. They've already learned about communication, about making eye contact, about body language, about smiling, about facial expressions, and the baby tunes into that right away. As soon as you've made that connection, then you have learned right there in that moment the ground rules of empathy. I accept you as who you are, you accept me as I am, and we're going to make a bond and connect. And that's about as basic as peace education gets from my view. I think when we start with that, then we can move into, well, how do we govern? How do we govern in a way that we can make the world a peaceful place? How do we honor our history and yet not move forward making the same mistakes that we've had before? What does truth and reconciliation mean, and what can that look like for us? I don't think we can solve those big problems if we haven't had an opportunity to make space in the learning that we do to become acquainted with each other, to make space for each other, to share our stories, and then to grow from those stories. As I watch the young man in our school from Yemen who's desperately trying to grow within his story and become part of what the story is at our school, I realize again, just like I did back at Harkness with a young man from Palestine, how important it is to make space for those stories to live and not necessarily be analyzed or explored, but just to live so that we can all learn to accept them and embrace them and make them a part of who we are. If we are going to build schools that make space for that, we need to have curriculum that honors that. We need to have curriculum that knows there are children that are going to be the sharers and the recipients and the co-creators of what happens in classrooms as a result of that curriculum. When I think about what the possibilities are, and within some of the sort of really strictly confining ways that the curriculum has been developed, it is clear to me that nobody thought about how will a child receive this? How will a child that's coming from a really traumatic background, whether it's a refugee experience or just losing their home in Canada or the loss of a parent, how will they receive this kind of curriculum and find space to grow in it? It doesn't matter whether it's math or science or social studies or language arts or phys ed or music. All of those curricula need to be able to have space in them so that children can find themselves. And I'm just kind of worried that we've lost sight of who the curriculum is for in this new draft that's come up. The other piece, just as an aside to this, that I'm alarmed by as I've been going through this, is the total workload when you look at what's expected for small, and I'm only looking at K4, but when you look at what's expected for small children to do in multiple subject areas. So if you have a math curriculum that has double the number of objectives from the previous curriculum, and then all of the others do as well, there is no way you can cover all of those. Even if you're just saying memorize this, you can't cover that in the amount of time that we've got. And nobody's spoken to extending the school day, and I don't think anybody, well, I don't know, maybe they would. I don't want them to. It's long enough. I think that we would be looking at sending a lot more work home for children to memorize and to do at home. And that would upset the balance in family relationships as well. So the ripple effects of a not well thought out curriculum are far bigger than what they are just in the classroom. So as teachers, we can push back and say, the scope and sequence isn't coherent, and you're missing all of the pre-concepts that need to be taught, and this doesn't make sense to just memorize, and we can give all of the good pedagogical reasons for that. But the human reasons need to be considered as well. And I think it's the humanity of the children that is missing right now from where that curriculum has evolved from. It's evolved from an ideology as opposed to how will we bring a living opportunity to children through opening up the curriculum to them. So I've been very fortunate because, as Danica says, I've been in education for, oh my goodness, so far. I think this is my it's got to be my 32nd year, because I was pregnant when I did my practice teaching, and my daughter just turned 32, my youngest daughter. So 32 years. And I've been really fortunate to, even though I was part of the design and review committee for the social studies curriculum. I worked on the rewrite for the math curriculum back in the 90s, and also for the science curriculum in the 90s as well. As a brand new teacher, I've had a lot of experience working with curriculum. Even though we wanted it to change, I consider myself fortunate to have worked within a curriculum design that gave us room to speak to the humanity of children, through peace education, through roots of empathy, through offering them opportunities to share their stories and let them live out on the landscape in a respectful way, not to be teased, not to be ridiculed, not to be diminished, but to be honored and respected for your experiences, to understand that your experiences now become mine, and I am building that into the milieu of who I am and who I will be as I go forward. So I want to thank you for listening to me. For a long time. As Danica says, I can talk. I'm looking at Tracy and Samantha, who've been in my classes, and I'm thinking they know I can talk for a long time. But it's pretty easy for me to talk about something that I feel really passionate about. And the stories of children, as a result of being able to live in peace education, I think are the most powerful evidence that we have that peace education is what we need in schools. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Lorraine. You are awesome. I really appreciated all your stories you shared, but just like how interconnected it all is, and how we really need to get to that root of humanity and who we are and our connection to each other. Because I think it's not just about school and learning; it's about becoming a citizen and a person who participates in our society, not just takes, right?
That's right.
And I know Corinne